Well, good morning, church. Happy Monday morning to you. I have been teaching a class in Sunday school on the book of Philippians. And last evening I was thinking about our devotional time together, and one of the verses that we used a couple of weeks ago kind of stuck out at me, and I thought maybe we could develop it a little bit this morning in our devotional time. Paul was writing the Philippian church, and if you look into the book of Acts, you'll see the story of the Philippian church where they received a call from a Macedonian man, come over, and they left and went to the mainland Europe, there in southern Greece, to begin their ministry there. And they went to the city of Philippi, which was Luke's hometown. Luke probably studied medicine there in Philippi because there was a school of medicine there. And when they got to Philippi, they went down by the river where they ministered to some women, Jewish women that was there, and a lady by the name of Lydia was saved in her whole household, and that became Paul and Silas's base of operations, if you would. Not much later than that, Paul and Silas found themselves being followed around by a slave girl who was, these men are from the Most High God, and began to get annoying, I guess, to Paul. And Paul turned around and cast a demon out of her. And that started the snowball rolling down the hill while everybody in Philippi, at least the merchants and some of the other folks, got really mad at Paul, and they were beaten and thrown in prison. And the jailer put him in the dungeon and put him in stocks and chains. And at midnight, that wonderful famous portion of Scripture in Acts says at midnight they began to sing. In the midst of trial, in the midst of horrible conditions, they begin to sing. And of course, the earthquake, the jail doors opened, the chains fell off. The Philippian jailer was about to kill himself, and Paul says, "We're still here, we're still here." The Philippian jailer then gave his heart to the Lord along with his whole household, and basically that's how the Philippian church started. A lot of things happened from the time the church Philippi started, and Paul wrote this letter, probably about 10 years. Paul writes this letter to them to encourage them. He's in prison himself, and Paul is under arrest, chained to a guard, awaiting trial, which never happened, by the way, because his accusers never showed up and he was set free. But in the midst of that, Paul writes the Philippians a letter, and I want to read to you two verses, chapter 1, verses 12 and 13. "I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard, and the rest of my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear." There's this term that has been used often, especially in the realm of social media, called influencers. And basically what I am told by my crack staff, Adam Jones, he tells me that an influencer is someone basically who is paid by a company or paid by someone to get people to buy their brand, or to encourage people to think or to buy or whatever a certain way. So they are influencers. Well, I don't know all about that. I don't know how all that works, and really, I don't care. If I'll do my own research, thank you very much. But however, that idea of being an influencer, I believe, is wrapped up in these two verses. Paul is in prison. And if you think about it, someone who's in prison did something wrong, so do they have much of a testimony? Paul's in prison. In fact, later on in the letter, Paul says, there are some who don't like me, and they try to belittle me and berate me, probably because he was in prison. However, Paul says, listen, because of my imprisonment, the whole imperial guard has heard about Jesus. Being the Roman soldier that was chained to Paul, he's going to hear about Jesus. And before long, the whole imperial guard hears about Jesus. And then Paul says this, very, very, and most of the brothers, he's talking about the people that are around him, people in Philippi, those who he's had contact with, those who he has been discipling, those who he had been preaching to. Paul says in verse 14, and most of the brothers, having been confident in the Lord by my imprisonment. So they looked at Paul and his imprisonment not as something negative, but something that they could take confidence in. It's almost like if they say Paul can be imprisoned, chained to a guard, and he can still share the gospel of Jesus Christ. How much more should I, who I'm relatively free, I can walk around, I'm not chained to a guard, I can share the gospel with whoever I want to. And so they became more confident and more bold to speak the word without fear. That's an influencer. Paul was an influencer, and these brothers became influencers. We find ourselves at times in difficult situations, find ourselves perhaps with an illness. We find ourselves limited, find ourselves out of a job. We find ourselves with relational difficulties or situations beyond our control. And the question is am I going to survive, or can I have a testimony in the midst of this? Paul was chained to a guard. He was in prison, and yet he found opportunity to share Jesus. I believe that in the midst of our difficulties, in the midst of our trials, we can find opportunity to let people know that, yes, I am in a bad situation. This stinks. However, Jesus is with me. Jesus is with me in the midst of whatever storm. And he is able to say, peace be still, or he is able to walk through us in the midst of that storm. Either way, we become, when we share that story, when we share our story about how Jesus has brought us through, we become influencers for the cause of Christ. Let me read this verse 14 to you again. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to seek the word without fear. Brothers, sisters, friends, family, whatever's going on in our life, we can be an influencer for Jesus Christ. God bless you. Have a great week. We hope to see you Sunday morning. We'd love to have you. God bless you. Take care.